Every family business you've ever heard of, the ones with airports and logistics empires and glass towers with the family name etched over the door, started in the exact same room. A kitchen table, a garage, a truck bought used with cash that was supposed to be for something else. Level 1 looks nothing like the empire it becomes, and if you only study the empire, you miss the part that actually matters. The part where it almost didn't happen at all. This is the level-by-level breakdown of how a business goes from $0 to $250 million, and level 1 is the ugliest, most fragile stretch of the entire climb. $0 to $1 million, no org chart, no safety net. Just one person, usually broke, usually exhausted, doing every single job the business needs before anyone else is willing to believe in it. The money to start almost never comes from where people assume. Not venture capital, not some angel investor circling a napkin sketch. It comes from savings accounts drained to 4 figures. It comes from a home equity loan signed at a kitchen table with a spouse who isn't fully sure this is a good idea. It comes from a parent or an in-law writing a check for $40,000 with a look that says this is the last one. You've seen the story before. A guy named Warwick Doss mortgaged a paid-off truck to buy his first commercial oven. A woman named Lena Akabe borrowed $18,000 from her brother-in-law to license a food product out of her actual kitchen, the one with her kids' height marks penciled on the doorframe 18 inches from the stove. That's level 1 capital. Small, personal, borrowed against relationships that don't come with a term sheet. And once that money's in, the founder becomes everything. Salesperson in the morning, cold calling from a list they built themselves. Bookkeeper at night, tracking invoices in a spreadsheet that gets more chaotic every month. Deliveries on the weekend because there's nobody else to make them. There's no HR department because there's no H, just R, one person doing every job badly enough to survive and well enough to keep going. Warwick baked, packaged, delivered, and invoiced the same loaf of bread on the same Tuesday for the first 14 months. Nobody tells you at level 1 that wearing every hat isn't a flex. It's just what happens when there's no money to pay anyone else to wear it. And this is exactly where the first real mistake shows up, the one that quietly kills more businesses than bad products ever do. The founder's personal checking account and the business's checking account become the same account. Rent money and inventory money live in the same place. A slow month means the mortgage payment and the supplier invoice are suddenly fighting for the same $2,300, and there's no wall between them because nobody built one. It feels efficient in year 1. It feels like drowning by year 2, when tax season arrives and nobody, not even the founder, can say with confidence what the business actually made versus what simply passed through a personal account on its way to being spent. Then comes the hire. The first employee, usually somewhere between $300,000 and $700,000 in revenue, when the founder physically cannot do one more thing without something breaking. And this is where the cash flow squeeze actually starts to bite. A $3,200 monthly payroll commitment lands on a business that's never had a guaranteed monthly obligation before. Revenue that used to feel like enough suddenly isn't, because now there's a payday every 2 weeks whether the business had a good month or not. Founders who felt flush at $600,000 in revenue find themselves staring at a bank balance that dipped below 0 the week after making their first hire, wondering how growth managed to make them feel poorer. This is the level where most businesses die, not eventually. Not slowly. Right here, before they ever cross $1 million. Roughly 8 out of 10 new businesses don't make it past this stage, and it's rarely the big dramatic failure people imagine. It's a founder running out of runway 3 months before the thing would have worked. It's a mixed bank account that made a profitable business look unprofitable on paper until nobody, including the bank, would extend another dollar of credit. If you're building through this level right now, or you're trying to understand how the family businesses you admire actually survived it, the strategies for structuring this stage properly, separating accounts, timing hires, protecting runway, are laid out in detail in the book linked in the description, and it's discounted for readers this week only. Because here's what changes once a business actually clears $1 million, the founder stops being the whole business and starts becoming the person who has to build one. That transition from doing everything to designing a system where things get done without you is where level 2 begins. But before we get there, there's one mistake sitting inside level 1 that quietly costs founders more than almost anything else on this entire climb. A specific way personal and business money gets tangled that isn't discovered for years, sometimes not until a lender or a buyer looks at the books and asks a question the founder can't answer. What that mistake actually is, and what it costs to unwind it, is broken down fully at the link in the description. Somewhere past $1 million, the business stops fitting in one person's head. That's the actual marker of level 2, not the revenue number itself, but the morning the founder wakes up and realizes they can no longer hold every invoice, every customer complaint, and every delivery schedule in their skull at the same time. The spreadsheet that worked at $400,000 starts lying at $1.2 million. Not because the founder got worse at it, because the business got too big for a tool built for a kitchen table. This is the level where you hire people who aren't you. Not another set of hands to do the same job faster, but an actual layer of management, someone to run operations while the founder runs sales, someone to run the warehouse while the founder runs everything else. A woman named Odalise Fenn, who built a specialty foods distributor out of a rented cooler space, hired her first operations manager at $1.4 million in revenue for $61,000 a year, and she'll tell you the 6 months after that hire were harder than the 2 years before it. Not because the hire was wrong, because letting go was its own skill, one nobody taught her, one that felt like losing control right at the moment the business needed her to release it. Delegating for real, not delegating the way it looks on a whiteboard, means the founder has to survive watching someone else do something imperfectly that they used to do perfectly themselves. That's the tax of level 2. You pay it in stomach aches, in rechecking work you said you wouldn't recheck, in biting your tongue in a meeting because the point of hiring someone was to stop being the only person in the room with the answer. Alongside the people, the systems have to show up too. Real bookkeeping, not a shoebox of receipts and a login to an app nobody reconciles. Payroll that runs on its own schedule instead of whenever the founder remembers to open the laptop. A budget that separates what the business is spending from what the business is guessing it might spend. Odalise brought in a part-time bookkeeper at $1.5 million in revenue for $1,800 a month, and the first thing that bookkeeper found was $34,000 in vendor payments that had been made twice over 11 months. Nobody stole it. Nobody was careless in any way you could point to and blame. It just happened, the way money quietly leaks out of any business, still being run off memory and good intentions instead of an actual system. And this is exactly the level where family starts showing up in the business in ways it never did at level 1. A sibling who's between jobs comes on to help with sales. A spouse starts doing the books on nights and weekends because it's cheaper than hiring someone. A nephew who's good with computers ends up running the website because he offered and nobody else wanted to. It feels like a gift in year 1 of this stage. Extra hands from people who already believe in you, working for less than market rate because they love you, not because the market said so. It becomes a liability almost immediately if nobody writes anything down. This is the specific mistake that shows up at level 2 more than almost any other. Family members working in the business with no formal role, no job description, and no consistent pay structure. Odalise's brother worked 18 months in her warehouse before anyone, including him, could tell you exactly what his title was or what he was owed if the business ever got sold. He was paid in cash some months, added to payroll other months, given extra around the holidays that wasn't tracked as compensation at all. When a bank asked for organizational documentation during a loan application, there was no answer for who he was on paper. The relationship survived it. Plenty of family businesses don't. Because here's the decision level 2 actually forces, the one that didn't exist at level 1. What to do with the first real profit. At $400,000 in revenue, there usually wasn't profit worth arguing over. At $3 million, there is, and the founder, the spouse doing the books, and the sibling running the warehouse don't automatically agree on what happens to it. Reinvest it into a second location. Pay down the personal debt that funded the business in the first place. Distribute it to family members who feel, reasonably or not, that they've earned a piece of what they helped build. This is where family businesses either build the muscle to have hard conversations about money out loud, or they avoid the conversation entirely and let resentment do the deciding instead. This is also the level where the first real financing enters the picture. Not a home equity loan signed at a kitchen table. An actual line of credit from a bank that wants to see 2 years of financial statements before they'll extend $250,000 against receivables. Getting approved for it feels like a milestone. It's also the first time the business has an obligation to someone outside the family, a bank that doesn't care about loyalty or history, only about whether the numbers hold up on paper. If you're anywhere near this stage right now, watching family and cash flow and management all collide at the same time, the exact frameworks for structuring roles, pay, and financial systems before they turn into problems are laid out in the book linked in the description, and it's discounted for readers this week only. because the businesses that get this level wrong don't usually find out until years later, when it's a lot more expensive to fix. Because sitting underneath all of this is one mistake that costs family businesses more than almost anything else at this stage. A specific way the line of credit gets used that quietly sets up a crisis 3 years down the road, one that doesn't show up on a single financial statement until the exact moment the business can least afford it. What that mistake actually is gets broken down fully at the link in the description. Somewhere past $10 million, the business stops being something the family can run on instinct and shared history. That's the real marker of level 3. Not the revenue line, but the meeting where an outside executive sits at the table for the first time, and the family realizes they don't actually agree on who's in charge of what. This is the level where the org chart stops being a formality and starts being load-bearing. A man named Corwin Aldrich took his father's HVAC parts distribution business from $9 to $22 million in 4 years, and the moment that broke something open wasn't a sale or a new warehouse. It was hiring a VP of operations from outside the family for $185,000 a year, a woman named Petra Kowalczyk who had never met his father, never worked a single Saturday out of loyalty, and asked in her first week why 3 of his cousins had different job titles doing the exact same job. Nobody had an answer. That question is what level 3 is actually about. Because up until now, the business ran on relationships. Everyone knew everyone, everyone trusted everyone, and the org chart lived mostly in the founder's head and a little in tradition. At $15 million, $20 million, $30 million, that stops working, not because trust disappeared, but because the business is now too big for trust alone to be the operating system. You need people whose loyalty is to the job, not to the last name, and that's a genuinely uncomfortable hire for a family business to make. Corwin's father sat through Petra's first strategy presentation with his arms crossed the entire time. 6 months later, he called her the smartest hire he never wanted to make. Alongside the executives comes the governance nobody wants to formalize because formalizing it means admitting the handshake era is over. A board. Not a fake board of relatives who show up for the holiday dinner and call it a meeting. An actual board with at least one outside member who owes the family nothing and will say the thing nobody at Thanksgiving is willing to say. A family council, separate from the company itself, where decisions about ownership, legacy, and who gets what get discussed on their own track instead of bleeding into operational meetings. Corwin's family didn't create theirs until year 3 of this level, after an argument about whether his sister's husband should get equity turned into a 6-week silence that nearly stalled a $4 million equipment purchase because nobody could agree who had authority to sign for it. Succession planning starts here too, even if nobody says the word out loud yet. Not because anyone's retiring, because at $20 million in revenue, if the founder gets hit by a bus on a Tuesday, the business needs to survive Wednesday. That's a sentence Corwin's estate attorney said to him almost word for word, and he says it's the sentence that made him finally sign the documents he'd been avoiding for 2 years. This is also the level where the accounting has to grow up completely. A bookkeeper and a part-time CFO-adjacent spreadsheet wizard got you to $10 million. They will not get you past it. You need an actual CFO, someone who runs monthly forecasting, manages relationships with auditors, and can answer a bank's questions without having to call the founder from a parking lot first. Corwin hired his CFO, a man named Desmond Akibe, at $14 million in revenue for $210,000 a year, and the first audit Desmond ran found $290,000 in inventory that existed on paper and nowhere in the actual warehouse. Nobody stole it. It had just evaporated slowly, the same way money always evaporates in a business still being tracked by memory dressed up as software. And tax strategy stops being an April conversation and becomes a year-round one. Entity structure, holding companies, estate planning that determines whether the next generation inherits a business or inherits a tax bill large enough to force a sale. Corwin's family restructured into a holding company at $18 million, specifically so ownership could be transferred in pieces over years instead of all at once in a single taxable event when his father eventually steps back. The lawyer who set it up told him plainly, families that wait until the founder is sick to think about this lose an average of 7 figures they didn't have to lose. Which brings you to the mistake that shows up at this level more than any other, the one that looks harmless for years before it becomes catastrophic. Failing to separate ownership from management. Just because you own 40% of the business doesn't mean you should run the sales department. Just because your name is on the building doesn't mean you get final say on operational decisions you're not qualified to make anymore. Corwin's uncle owned 15% of the company and had zero operational role, yet kept overriding pricing decisions in the field because, in his words, it's my name too. That single unresolved boundary cost the business a $1.1 million contract when a client walked after getting two different prices from two different family members in the same week. If you're building toward this level right now, watching family loyalty and professional structure start to pull in opposite directions, the specific frameworks for setting up boards, family councils, and ownership boundaries before they cost you a client or a contract are laid out fully in the book linked in the description, discounted for readers this week only. Because this is also the level where the outside world starts noticing you. Banks that wouldn't return your calls at $2 million now send relationship managers to your office unprompted. Private equity firms start showing up in your inbox, testing the water, asking questions that sound friendly but are actually valuation exercises. That access is real leverage. It's also the first moment a family business can accidentally sell more of itself or more control of itself than it meant to, simply because nobody in the family understood what the term sheet actually said. That exact mistake, the clause buried in early PE interest that quietly costs families control of the business they built, is broken down in full at the link in the description. Somewhere past $50 million, the business stops being a company and starts being an empire with a company inside it. That's a level where the Kilbride family found themselves 8 years after buying out a struggling packaging distributor for $6 million and turning it into an industrial supply network doing $190 million a year across 11 states. And the thing that broke open at this level wasn't a product line or a new warehouse. It was a phone call from a private equity firm in Chicago asking Thaddeus Kilbride, the second-generation CEO, whether his family had ever considered unlocking liquidity without giving up control. He didn't understand the question. His lawyer had to explain it to him twice. This is the level where a single legal entity stops making sense entirely. One company, one bank account, one liability umbrella covering everything you own starts looking less like simplicity and more like exposure. Thaddeus's family restructured into 9 separate entities under a single holding company, splitting real estate, equipment, operating divisions, and intellectual property into their own legal walls, each one insulated from the others. His attorney, a woman named Odalise Farran, who specializes exactly in this kind of work, put it to him plainly. One lawsuit against one delivery driver in one state shouldn't be able to reach the warehouses in the other 10. That restructuring cost the family $340,000 in legal and accounting fees the first year. It also meant that when a forklift accident in their Ohio facility turned into a $2.9 million lawsuit 2 years later, it touched exactly one entity and nothing else. Succession, which was a quiet background conversation at $20 million, becomes the loudest conversation in the room at this level, whether anyone wants it to be or not. Thaddeus is 54. His father, the founder, is 81 and still shows up to the office 3 days a week out of habit more than function. There are 3 adult children in the next generation, only one of whom actually works in the business, and at $190 million in revenue, that is no longer a family detail. It is a formal, documented, legally binding plan, or it is a $190 million company one funeral away from chaos. Thaddeus's family finally brought in a succession specialist named Garrick Voss, who told them something they didn't want to hear in their first meeting. He said most families at this level don't fail because they lack money. They fail because they never wrote down who's actually in charge when the founder can't answer the phone anymore. It took the Kilbrides 14 months and $210,000 in advisory fees to build a succession plan that named roles, not just names, decided by vote and documented in writing, instead of assumed at Thanksgiving. The financing at this level changes shape completely too. Banks that used to return calls now show up with syndicates, multiple lenders sharing a single loan because no single bank wants that much exposure on its own books. Thaddeus's most recent expansion, a $38 million acquisition of a regional competitor, was financed through a 5-bank syndicate alongside a minority investment from a private equity partner who took a board seat and 12% of the company in exchange for capital and, more importantly, credibility with lenders who wouldn't have picked up the phone otherwise. Some families at this size go further and issue actual corporate bonds, borrowing directly from institutional investors instead of banks at all. This is no longer a business borrowing money. This is a business being underwritten the way a mid-sized public company would be, just without the stock ticker. And somewhere in the middle of all this, the family's personal wealth needs a wall built between it and the company entirely, which is why the Kilbrides formed a family office 2 years ago, a standalone operation with its own staff, whose entire job is managing the family's money, real estate, and investments outside the business itself. It cost roughly $1.2 million a year to run. It also meant that when the packaging division had a brutal quarter and needed a temporary cash infusion, that money came from the operating business's own credit line and never once touched the family's personal accounts, because those accounts, for the first time, had nothing to do with the company at all. The mistake that shows up more than any other at this level is the one that already almost got them. Poor succession planning doesn't just create awkward dinners anymore. It destroys generational wealth outright. Garrick Voss keeps a file of businesses he's seen collapse this way. Families with $80 million, $150 million, $200 million in assets that got split, sued, or sold off entirely within 3 years of a founder's death, not because the business failed, but because nobody had legally documented who was actually supposed to run it. One family he worked with lost 60% of company value in 18 months fighting itself in probate court. The business didn't die from competition, it died from silence. What actually separates the businesses that break through $250 million from the ones that stall right here isn't revenue, and it isn't even talent. It's whether the family did the unglamorous, invisible work early enough. The entities, the succession documents, the board seats given up on purpose, the family office built before it was urgently needed instead of after. The businesses that stall are almost always the ones still running on the same trust and memory that worked fine at $5 million and quietly stopped working 40 steps ago. If you followed this whole progression from a founder doing everything alone to a family running something closer to an institution, the pattern underneath every level is the same. The mistakes that cost the least happen early, and the ones that cost the most hide in exactly the topics nobody wants to formalize on time. And the single most expensive one at this level, the succession failure that can quietly erase 7 figures of value before a single lawsuit is even filed, usually doesn't surface until years after the founder is already gone, when it's too late to fix cheaply. It's broken down in full with what it actually costs and how to structure around it before it finds you, at the link in the description.